Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah. In this first lesson, inshallah, we're going to be answering three questions. The first question is, what is a language? The second question is, how are languages learned in a general sense? And the third question is, how are languages used? How are languages used? Now, someone might ask themselves, why is it important to learn this? Why are we just going straight and learning the Arabic language? I think the reason why is really highlighted in Ibn Qayyim's statement that الجهل بالطريق والآفات والمقصود يضيع العمر مع تعب كثير وفائدة قليلة. The great Imam Ibn Qayyim, he mentions that you not knowing the path which leads to your goal and the obstacles in that path and the goal behind walking that path, pretty much. You not knowing these things will lead you to waste a lot of time and a lot of effort with very little benefits. So this statement can be applied to a lot of different spheres in life, and a lot of different aspects of life. Okay, first and foremost, for us, language learning. A lot of language learners don't really know what a language is and its different aspects and its different elements and how to go about learning those different aspects and how exactly languages are used and what they should prioritize. And because of that, they may spend years trying to learn a language with very little benefit and with a lot of hardship. And even if they do reach the goal, it wasn't as fast and as efficient that it could have been if they had just stopped and asked themselves, how does someone learn a language? So in this first lesson, inshallah, it will give some light and shed some light to how to do this. And likewise, in the second lesson, we're going to be more specific and really explain how we're going to learn the Arabic language in this specific course in light of what we specifically want, which is to learn the Arabic language, understand the Quran. But in this first lesson, we're just going to approach the topic in a very general sense. So to answer the first question, what is a language? A language is a structured system of communication. So a language is a system of communication. So we use languages to communicate, either by writing or by speaking. And it's structured. It's built on certain elements and certain pillars that direct and that, structure this system. So a communication or a language is very much structured, and any single language is structured in the same fashion. And that structure is made up of different elements and different pillars. And if someone learns those different elements on those different pillars, that person has learned the system of communication, which we call a language. So what is the structure? What is the structure that someone's learning when he's learning a language? There are 5 different things that make up the structure. There's 5 different elements that pretty much make up the structure, which we call a language. So how's a language structure? What are you learning? First and foremost, you're learning lexicon, which is vocabulary. So bayt, masjid, imam, hammam, sayara, the list goes on, right? Any language is made up of vocabulary that someone's learning when he's learning that language. Likewise, a language is made up of phonology. Phonology is the sound system that makes up that language. So the makharij, right, the points of articulation, different letters and different sounds that they represent, and so on and so forth. So for example, in Arabic, we have the ayn, which comes from the middle of the throat, which is not found in English. But in English, we have the P, which is not found in Arabic. So this is an example of phonology sound systems, and different languages have different sound systems. And we've already studied this in what we call tajweed, right? When we learn how to read the Arabic language. Then we have syntax. Syntax is grammar. Grammar is pretty much word order and word accordance. So how words pretty much relate to each other in a sentence and how they're ordered, subject first or verb first, verb always being, the same gender, if you will, as the subject, and so on and so forth. That's grammar. Then we have morphology. Morphology is a word structure. So any language, we have different words in those languages, and those words, if you change the structure of them, you change their form, you'll change its meaning, or you'll change their meaning. So for example, in English, we have a lot of suffix and we have a lot of prefix, right? So certain things that we add before the word or after the verb that change its meaning. So for example, un. Un is a prefix that we add to certain words and it changes its meaning. Happy, unhappy. We also have the suffix er. So for example, heal, healer. rap, rapper. So this is word structure. This is morphology. This is what we're talking about here. You're studying this and how these different elements that you add to the word or remove from the word will change its meaning. That's what morphology is about, which is another very, very important aspect of a language. And finally, we have discourse, which is language use. So language above the sentence. How does someone actually put different sentences together to make up a speech or to make up a sentence, and how someone uses that language in a discourse fashion. So when you put all these 5 things together, you get the structure which makes up a language. And anybody who's learning a language in reality is learning these 5 different elements, either all at the same time or step by step, right? So for someone who doesn't know Arabic phonology, the sound system, the different letters, usually they're going to start with that, right? And then after that, they may start with lexicon, basic vocabulary. And then after that, they may go on to syntax and morphology and those different rules. Then after that, they might actually start trying to use the language in discourse. When they put all these 5 things together, they get the structure of a language. So if you want to remember the structure, you can just remember the acronym LEPS MD. L stands for lexicon, P stands for phonology, S stands for syntax, M stands for morphology, and D stands for discourse. Now, the question is, how exactly do you learn these different elements? How exactly does someone go about learning these different elements that make up a language? Because any single person, their first language, they learned it when they were a child, whether it be Urdu, Somali, French, Arabic, whatever the case may, or English, whatever the case may be. When they learned that language, they learned it when they were very young. By the age 2 or 3, 4, they had fully mastered the basic structure of that language. The basic structure of that language, the person has fully grasped that in a general sense by the age of 2, 3, 4. So the question is, how exactly does this young child learn the complexity that we just explained, which makes up the structure of a language? How does a child learn grammar, morphology, phonology, the different vocabulary? How does a child go about learning all this complexity to the point by the age 2 or 3 is able to converse? So this is the question, how do we learn a language, right? This is the second question that we talked about. We understand what language is, but now how do we learn a language? I.e., how do you learn the structure previously mentioned that constructs the system of communication, which we call a language? More specifically, how does a child, how did we learn English or French or whatever the first language may be when we were so young? And this is called the logical problem of language learning. What's the logical problem of language learning? Linguists, they define this as being, how is it possible for children to achieve the final state of language with general ease and complete success, right? Given the complexity of the linguistic system which they acquire and their immature cognitive capacity at the age they do so. So pretty much, how is it possible for a child by the age 2, 3, 4 to have pretty much fully grasped all the complexity we just mentioned while they're so young? How is it possible that human beings are able to pick up languages just like that when they're so young? And the answer to this question can actually be found in the Quran. The Quran is an explanation for everything. And Allah said in Surah Ar-Rahman, عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ. Allah mentions Surah Ar-Rahman, Allah mentions his different favors. One of the first favors that he mentions is عَلَّمَهُ الْبَيَانِ. He taught man speech. He taught human speech. He taught humans al-bayan, how to express themselves through speech. What's meant here is, as Ibn Ashur, the famous Tunisian and the great Tunisian scholar, mentions in his famous tafsir, ومعنى تعليم الله الإنسان البيان أنه خلق فيه السعادة لعلم ذلك والهمه وضع اللغة لتعارفه والهمه وضع اللغة لتعارفه. Ibn Ashur, he mentions that what's meant here in his tafsir, what's meant here by Allah's statement, Allah and Allah knows best, علمه البيان, is that Allah, he placed into man the natural inclination and the natural capability to learn languages. That languages pretty much are natural. They're a very natural thing that we have, that Allah has placed in us. We're just able to naturally learn languages. And this is also the conclusion that many linguists, they came to, which is that human beings have a language faculty. They have this language faculty that enables them to pick up a language if they're exposed to it, okay? And this is why a child's able to just naturally pick up a language, because it's as natural to him as eating or as walking, because Allah has placed in us this natural inclination and the natural disposition to be able to pick up languages. So languages are a very natural thing to human beings, because Allah has made it that way, subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's from his favors that he has not given to other creatures. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. Allah has favored and, honored the son of Adam, on a lot of the creation. So that is pretty much how human beings, in a very general sense, learn a language. And that's why the main takeaway I want you to understand is that a language is more of a skill of communication than a static piece of information, which is acquired and not simply taught. In other words, a language is caught and not taught. In other words, a language is caught and not taught. So fundamentally, when someone's trying to learn a language, what that person really needs to focus on is acquiring that language, not necessarily studying the rules and the grammar and the morphology, and all those rules are very, very important and will help the learner. But fundamentally, the learner needs to expose her or himself to the language, whether it be writing or reading or listening. And by exposing him or her or exposing himself to the language, that person will be able to catch that language, will be able to acquire that language. And those rules that you learn in this class and in this course will help you in acquiring the language, but they're not sufficient. Rather, the learner needs to expose himself to the language. And we're going to explain this in more details in the next course or the next lesson, how exactly we're going to go about exposing ourselves to the language and acquiring the language. But this was just to make you understand that languages are a very natural thing to human beings that we naturally acquire. And it's not something that is complex or difficult or anything like that. Rather, it's something that if someone's exposed to enough, if someone's placed in an environment where that language is spoken enough, naturally with the passage of time, that person, inshallah, will be able to start picking up that language. Now, the thing here is that we are trying to learn the Quran. We're trying to learn the Arabic in the Quran, which is read most of the time. And the Quran, or the Arabic in the Quran, is this very specific type of Arabic that's not really spoken anymore, right? We're trying to learn Fusha, classical Arabic. So for us, we do need to actually put a lot of emphasis on the rules, on the grammar, on the morphology, to be able to use those rules to understand not only any type of Arabic, but specifically Fusha Arabic, classical Arabic, and to understand it in a written form. Because yes, human beings naturally acquire languages, but they naturally acquire languages in a spoken form. But reading is something that a child needs to be taught. Learning letters and how to connect letters and how to pronounce letters and how to read is something that we need to go to school to learn. So in that sense, for our specific goal, we do need to put a lot of emphasis on the rules. We do need to put a lot of emphasis on the structure. And we can't just simply say, we're just going to expose ourselves to a language and magically we're just going to pick it up. That is not the case. That's not the point here. My main point is to make you understand that languages are caught and not taught. Expose yourself to a language, and we're going to explain how to do that. But at the same time, in this course, we're going to help in acquiring the rules and acquiring the information necessary for you to be able to understand the exposure to that language that you're going to receive, inshallah. So how are we going to learn the different elements that make up the structure of a language? How are we going to learn the structure of Arabic? So for lexicon, which is vocabulary, we're going to learn it through apps. There are many different apps out there that are wonderful to learn vocabulary. Okay, there's Anki, there's Duolingo, there's Drops, and there's other apps that are more centered around vocabulary that's found in the Quran, which I've shared and I will share with you in the link and on the website, inshallah. So those apps I just mentioned, inshallah, will be shared through a link and through the website, inshallah. Now, for phonology, we've already learned phonology through tajweed, so we don't need to go through how to pronounce the individual letters, how to put them together. This is something that this course is not designed to do, but rather this course is designed to just teach you the meaning and how to understand the Arabic language, or not necessarily how to read the Arabic language, which is something that the person already learned. Now, for syntax and morphology, this is what the Medina books are really going to be used for. The Medina books are going to be used to teach us syntax and morphology in class, so in the recordings. And for this course, which is the language in use of putting everything together and putting sentences together and reading sentences and reading texts, this will be done through reading, because as we covered, we're trying to learn the Arabic language and the Quran, and it's going to be done in class, right, through the text that we're going to be reading, and also by yourself. So in the recordings, we're going to be going over the text, and likewise on your own, you should be going over the dialogues that we're going to be covering in the actual recordings themselves. So this is how we're going to learn the different elements that make up the structure, which is the Arabic language, keeping in mind that language is a very natural thing that is caught and not simply taught. That being said, this was the second question. So we learned how, or what is a language? We learned how languages are taught or learned, if you will. But now the third question is, how are languages used? How do we use languages? So how is a language used? A language is used in 4 different ways. So there are 4 language abilities. There are 4 things that people do with languages. We listen with a language, we read with a language, we speak with a language, and we write with a language, right? So oracy skills, so skills that have to do with, your voice, is listening or speaking, or voice in general. So we listen to music with our ears, and we speak, a language for our tongue. So it has to do with oracy, with speaking. Then we have literacy. So literacy is things that we do that have to do with, writing and things like that, which is reading and writing. And then we have the receptive skills. The receptive skills are things that you do with a language when you're receiving language. When I'm listening, I'm not producing anything. I'm just listening and receiving the language. Likewise, when I'm reading, I'm not producing a language, but rather I'm receiving the language through a written form. Then we also have the productive skills. The productive skills are speaking and writing. So when I'm speaking, I'm producing language. And when I'm writing, I'm also producing language. So these are the 4 different things those are the 4 different ways we use a language. These are the 4 different ways that we use a language. Now, some linguists mention a 5th competence, a 5th ability, which is called inner thinking, which is the ability to use a language as a thinking tool. So what language do you think in? Do you think in French? Do you think in English? Do you think in Arabic? Do you think in Somali? Do you think in Urdu? The list goes on. Many people are bilingual and multilingual. They have multiple languages, but usually they only think in really one language. But this is a whole other issue that I don't want to go into details with concerning, do we think in a language or not? Is thought and language separate or the same? That's a whole other discussion, which has to do with neuroscience. Now, that being said, does every single person use language the same way? Does every single person listen and read and speak and write in all different languages that they may have? So for example, someone, and a lot of us, I'm sure, have 2 or 3 different languages that they know. They have their heritage language, which is most likely the immigrant language that they learn from their parents, whether it be Urdu or Somali. Then they have the language that they use in the country that they live in, whether it be French or English, or they're living in UK or whatever the case may be. So the question is, this person that knows 2 different languages, does this person use those 2 different languages the exact same way? Does the person write in Somali and read in Somali? Or does the person mostly just speak in Somali in his home and listen to Somali from his hoyo or from his father or her father, but doesn't necessarily read and write it? Rather, when he goes to school, he or she does reading and does writing and does listening and does speaking in English. So I'm trying to make you understand is that bilingualism, having more than 1 languages and learning multiple languages, is not done in the same exact way. The idea of a balanced bilingual, the person who has complete balance in all these 4 different abilities in multiple different languages, is more of a myth. It's more of a myth than a reality, as linguists mention. Because Bilingualism is of two types concerning or according to linguists. We have active bilingualism and passive bilingualism. Active bilingualism is someone who's able to do the productive skills of a language. So someone who's able to speak in a language, okay, listen to a language maybe, right? What's meant by productive skills is more just the speaking aspect here. So someone may be able to speak a language, but may not necessarily be able to read or write a language, right? And on the other hand, someone may be more passive in their language. Someone who's able to do receptive skills, they may be able to read and be able to listen and understand, but speaking and writing is more difficult for that person. So people that are bilinguals definitely know this reality, that their two languages are not equal in all different abilities. Their two languages are not used in every single sphere of life that they have. Rather, in their homes, they may speak one language with their parents, but outside their home, they go to school in a different language, they work in a different language, they socialize in a different language. And this is the reality of having multiple languages. And this is something that we need to understand, that the two wheels of bilingualism exist in different styles and styles. So someone can be able to speak a language and not write or read it. But that doesn't mean that that person is not bilingual or does not know that language, but it just reflects the reality, which is someone does not use a different language for the same reasons. My point here is, if someone's trying to learn Arabic, they need to understand this. They need to understand, why am I trying to learn the Arabic language? And for what aspect of my life am I going to be using the Arabic language? Am I going to be using the Arabic language to go study in it and to go work in it and to go socialize in it? Or am I going to use it to understand the Quran and ahadith and kalam and ulama and so on and so forth? Because based on your goal, you're going to have to change your approach, right? If you want to go study in Arabic and you study secular sciences, you're going to have to study secular terms, right? Geography in Arabic. You're going to have to learn, geopolitics in Arabic. You're going to have to learn engineering terms in Arabic. But if that's not your purpose, then there's no benefit in doing that. Or if your goal is not to go speak, at the local cafe about your life in Arabic, then likewise, your goal is a bit different. So my main point here is, languages are learned for two reasons. And this is the biggest takeaway that someone should take from this video. Languages are learned for two reasons. This is as linguists break down: an academic competence or interpersonal competence. People who are learning a language for an academic competence or an academic purpose are learners who want to use their target language for an academic purpose or purposes, right? So for example, Chinese exchange students that come here, when they're learning English, they're learning it for an academic purpose. They're not learning it to go socialize in it. So when they're going to their engineering program, they're learning the English that they need in order to do the engineering program, but not necessarily to go, talk about politics and the weather in English. That's why they have, English as an academic for academic purposes classes. On the other hand, certain people are learning languages for an interpersonal competence, which is learners who want to use their target language for face-to-face contacts with other speakers. For example, ambassadors. Ambassadors are going to be posted in Zimbabwe. They're going to post in Portugal, in Spain, in Russia. They need to learn the language in order to have, a dinner party with, their counterpart in that country. So their goal is completely different than that Chinese student. So based on this, the person needs to understand and ask himself, what is my goal? Is my goal academic competence, Quran, Sunnah, Ahadith? Or is my goal interpersonal competence? Because based on this is going to specify where you're going to put your energy, where you're going to put your time. Because the reality of our life is that we don't have the time to learn everything at the same rate. Now, someone can start with academic competence and then move to interpersonal competence later on. But the person should focus on one before focusing on the other and should not try to do both at the same time. Because usually that will lead to a lot more effort being put in and a lot more time being necessary, and the person's limited energy and limited time being, squandered in different directions instead of being focused. So we're trying to learn the Arabic language for an academic competence or for an academic purpose, which is for the Quran and the Sunnah. Based on this, linguists they mentioned that the priorities for academic competence are in this order. First thing is vocabulary. Vocabulary that's specific to the field you want to study, right? A native speaker in a language has between a native adult speaker in a language that is educated has between 20,000 to 30,000 words. We're starting with maybe 10, 50, right, words around masjid, imam, we have a few words. So you want to go from those few words, and if you want to be native-like in that language, you need to reach at least 20 to 30,000 words in all different spheres of life: politics, socialization, cars, nature, weather, geography, the list goes on. That's a lot of vocabulary. And the reality of it is that our brains are limited in its capacity to absorb and memorize information. The majority of us is not able to memorize 2 or 3 pages of the Quran every single day. Likewise, the majority of us cannot memorize 100 vocabulary words in one day, talking about every single thing under the cloud. So we need to specify, I'm going to learn the vocabulary that's found where? In the Quran, in the Sunnah, in the books of Aqidah, in the books of Tafsir, in the books of Fiqh. That's what I'm going to be focusing on, not learning how to go buy furniture at the store, how to go rent an apartment. If I wanted to do that, I should be learning for interpersonal competence, not learning for the Quran and the Sunnah. So this is what's meant here. We need to learn vocabulary specific to the field that we want to study, because we have a limited amount of time and energy, and it's going to take us years to reach anything near 20,000 words or 30,000 words, and so on and so forth. The second main priority is reading. Our main priority is not speaking, it's reading, because we first and foremost read the books of the scholars and so on and so forth, and the Quran, of course, and the Hadith. The third thing is, of course, listening, to be able to listen to speak to the Mashayikhs, to be able to listen to Quran, understand it. The fourth thing is writing. And the last priority is speaking. The last priority is speaking and going out and talking about the weather and how the family and sickness and stuff like that. So these are our priorities that we're going to focus on. So now that we've understood what is a language, how are languages taught in a general sense or learned in a general sense, and how we use how do we use languages, how people use languages. Now we understand and we have a clear idea of where we're going, how to reach our goal, the different things we need to prioritize so that we don't end up wasting a lot of time with very little benefit. In terms of how in more details this course is going to function to reach our academic competence, that is what we're going to explain in our next lesson, inshallah.